A metal hot pot lands on the table, still boiling. The broth is orange, glossy, and crowded with prawns. Their shells glow coral red beneath a thin layer of chili oil. Mushrooms swell with broth. Evaporated milk softens the sharp edges into something rich enough to coat the lips. Then a spoon breaks the surface. The first sip is sour. The second is fragrant. The third arrives with enough chili to make the forehead reconsider its responsibilities. This is the tom yum recognized around the world. But it is not where the story begins. The earliest written tom yums were often made with fish. The oldest versions were not necessarily creamy. The chili itself was foreign. And for most of its history, tom yum was not one sacred recipe. It was a method for making whatever came out of the river taste astonishing. The orange soup became famous. The history begins with brown water.
Tom yum has no reliable invention date. There's no famous chef standing beside the first pot, no royal decree announcing that sour soup had finally been perfected, and no single ancient manuscript containing the recipe exactly as restaurants serve it today. That is because tom yum was never just one dish. It belonged to a broad family of boiled, sour, and aromatic preparations whose ingredients could change with the catch, the season, the household, and the region. Fish could replace prawns, chicken could replace fish, sour mango could do the work now performed by lime. A clear broth could remain almost transparent, while another version might be darkened with roasted chili paste. The name describes a culinary idea more effectively than a fixed formula, something boiled, then seasoned into the sharp, lively flavor world associated with yum. Tom yum was therefore less like a monument and more like a language. Different cooks spoke it with different ingredients. What joined the dishes together was not one mandatory protein, it was the tension inside the broth. Sourness made the mouth water, salt and fermented seasoning gave the liquid depth, aromatic plants lifted the smell away from plain boiled fish, heat sharpened the finish. The result was not meant to be eaten like a large Western bowl of soup standing alone as a complete meal. Traditionally, tom yum could sit at the center of a shared table, eaten with rice and balanced by other dishes. One spoonful of broth woke up the palate, one bite of rice calmed it down. Then the spoon returned to the soup and started the argument again. Tom yum's flexibility explains both its survival and the difficulty of tracing its beginning. A dish that changes with every river, market, and kitchen leaves fewer fingerprints than a court recipe measured and copied by professional cooks. People were almost certainly making sour aromatic soups before anyone printed the words tom yum. History simply arrived late for dinner.
The strongest origin story does not point to a palace. It points to Thailand's Central Plains. This low, fertile region is shaped by the Chao Phraya River and an enormous network of canals, tributaries, rice fields, and seasonal floodwater. UNESCO describes Tom Yum Kung as culinary knowledge associated with Buddhist riverside communities in these Central Plains, where freshwater prawns and local aromatic plants were readily available. In this landscape, water did more than irrigate rice. It moved people. It connected markets. It entered fields, filled canals, and carried edible life almost to the kitchen door. Fish and prawns were not luxury decorations arranged for a photograph. They were part of the local food system. A cook did not begin by asking, "What is the official recipe for tom yum?" The more immediate question was, "What did the river give us today?" Perhaps it was a firm freshwater fish, perhaps a basket of small prawns, perhaps only a modest catch that needed to feed several people once rice was added. Boiling was practical. Water stretched the protein. Herbs controlled unwanted odors. Sourness sharpened appetite in a hot climate. Fermented fish seasonings supplied salt and savor without requiring a large quantity of meat. The soup grew from ecology, not branding. This is also why the famous freshwater prawn makes culinary sense. Its head contains rich orange fat. Its shell releases sweetness. When simmered carefully, the broth becomes fuller without needing to become heavy. The liquid remains light enough to carry aromatic plants, but the prawn leaves behind a round, almost buttery richness. Crush the head slightly, and orange fat drifts into the broth in tiny clouds. Add lime later, and the acidity cuts through that richness so cleanly that the next spoonful feels less like a decision than a reflex. Yet prawns were only one possibility. The river was variable, so the soup had to be variable too. Tom yum survived because it was not imprisoned inside one ingredient list. It could follow the water. For most of its early history, tom yum lived in kitchens, not books. Recipes moved through observation. A younger cook watched how hard the lemongrass was struck, when the souring ingredient was added, and how the broth was corrected after tasting. Written records arrived much later. By the turn of the 20th century, Siamese cookbooks were beginning to preserve dishes that had long circulated through homes and professional kitchens. These early records matter because they do not present tom yum as one fixed prawn soup. Fish appears frequently. The broth could remain clear. Sour mango, tamarind, or lime might provide acidity, depending on the cook and the season. This tells us that the modern restaurant bowl was not the beginning. It was one branch of a much larger family. A fish tom yum tastes leaner than the prawn version. There is less shell fat in the broth, so sourness and herbs stand more clearly at the front. Tender flakes of river fish separate beneath the spoon, while the sharp broth makes plain rice taste unexpectedly sweet. The cookbook did not invent tom yum. It simply caught the soup standing still for a moment. Today, chili seems inseparable from Thai food, but no chili grew in ancient Thailand. Capsicum peppers originated in the Americas and entered Asia only after new maritime routes connected the continents from the late 15th century onward. By the early modern period, chilies were moving through ports across the Indian Ocean and Southeast Asia. They entered a Thai food culture that already understood pungency. Cooks had pepper, aromatic roots, sour fruit, and fermented seasoning. The chili did not teach them how to create strong flavor. It gave them a new kind of heat. The plant grew easily in tropical climates. It produced generously. It could be eaten fresh, dried, roasted, or pounded into paste. And unlike expensive imported black pepper, it could become a household crop. In tom yum, the chili joined a structure that already existed. The sourness woke the palate. Fish sauce gave the broth depth. Herbs filled the steam. Seafood contributed sweetness. Chili extended the finish. A fruit from the Americas entered a Thai river soup and became so thoroughly naturalized that its foreign origin almost disappeared. The ingredient supplied the fire. Thai cooks decided exactly when it should burn. The tom yum recognized around the world is often orange, creamy, and glossy with chili oil. That is tom yum kung nam kon. It is not the only form, and it was not the starting point. The older clear style, nam sai, allows the herbs, lime, and seafood to remain sharp and exposed. The thicker style adds roasted chili paste and often evaporated milk. The change transforms both flavor and appearance. Roasted chili paste adds smoke, sweetness, oil, and a deeper red color. Evaporated milk rounds the acidity and gives the broth enough body to cling lightly to the lips. The result is not as heavy as curry, but it feels richer than the clear soup. Clear tom yum behaves like a blade. Creamy tom yum behaves like velvet hiding a blade. The orange version also had enormous visual power. Under restaurant lighting, chili oil gleams across the surface,
Pale milk swirls through red paste, and coral prawns glow above the broth. The world did not fall in love with a false tom yum. It fell in love with the most theatrical member of the family.
In 2024, Tom Yum Kung was added to UNESCO's representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity. The recognition was not only for one bowl or one official recipe. It acknowledged the knowledge surrounding the dish, how communities selected local ingredients, how cooks balanced sourness, salt, aroma, and heat, and how that knowledge passed from one generation to another. Tom Yum survived because it kept changing. It moved from river fish to prawns, from clear broth to creamy orange soup, from household memory to printed recipes, from Bangkok restaurants to kitchens around the world. Yet its central idea remained simple. Take what the water gives you, make it fragrant. Give it enough sourness to wake the appetite. Add fermented depth. Then use chili not to bury the other flavors, but to make them impossible to ignore. The world remembers the orange soup, but inside that bowl are a Thai river, an American fruit, generations of cooks, and more than a century of change. Tom Yum became global not because it remained pure. It became global because it never stopped adapting.